Hello, Leo. If your sun, moon, or rising sign is Leo, then this reading may be for you. If you enjoy tarot stories that invite reflection, healing, and a deeper connection with yourself, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to join me for more readings like this. This is a general reading, so take what resonates with your journey and gently leave behind anything that doesn't feel aligned right now. As we spend this time together exploring these cards, trust your own intuition. I'm simply here to tell the story unfolding in front of me. The deepest meaning of any reading will always be found in your own feelings, experiences, and inner knowing. And the very first card appearing here is the Judgment card. There are moments in life when change doesn't arrive through a dramatic event. It doesn't come in the form of a long conversation, a delayed explanation, or a single moment that turns everything upside down. It arrives quietly. Like the moment you look back on an old story and realize your feelings are no longer standing where they once were. I can't help but feel that this is the energy surrounding many of you, Leo. Not because everything has been resolved. Not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because something inside of you is changing. The Judgment card comes through like someone stepping out of a room they've stayed in for far too long. You're still you. The story is still the story, but the way you see it has changed. There may have been a time when every thought of this person, this situation, or this memory triggered an immediate response in your heart. A message, a name, a song, a familiar place. Any one of them could pull you right back into old emotions. But then time did what time tends to do. It didn't erase the memories. It simply created enough distance for you to see things more clearly. And as the Judgment card appears here, I get the feeling that you're standing in that very space. No longer trying to prove anything. No longer trying to convince someone to understand you. No longer pouring all of your energy into questions you once felt desperate to answer. What's interesting is that this shift hasn't made you cold. It simply made you wiser. Then the Seven of Wands card appears, and I don't see someone fighting against the world. I see someone learning how to protect a peace they worked very hard to build. There were boundaries you once hesitated to set. Things you accepted even when they never truly sat right with your heart. But now you're beginning to understand that protecting your heart isn't selfish. Protecting your energy isn't the same as shutting people out. Sometimes it's simply a sign that you've come to recognize your own worth more deeply than before. And perhaps that's exactly what's creating a shift that others can feel too. I don't know who this person is, but the energy here suggests that someone may be seeing this story through a different lens now. Maybe they're remembering things they once took for granted. Maybe they're beginning to recognize the value of a presence they never fully understood before. Or perhaps they're finally seeing what got lost somewhere between strong emotions and too much distance. And that brings us to the Two of Wands card. This card feels like a crossroads forming, not outside of you, but within you. Because sometimes the biggest decision isn't about what we're going to do. It's about what we're going to continue carrying in our hearts. I feel that many Leos are standing in that space. Part of you knows how far you've come since everything happened. Another part still finds itself looking back from time to time. Not because you want to return, but because something still feels unfinished. It's not exactly regret. It's not exactly waiting. It's simply the feeling that this story still has one page left to turn. Then the Page of Wands card appears, and the energy shifts again, lighter, brighter. Like the first moment you realize there is still so much life ahead of you, that your heart wasn't created only to remember the past. It was also created to explore things that haven't happened yet. This card isn't speaking about an ending. It's not pointing toward a specific outcome. It feels more like a small light appearing in the distance, a quiet sign that a new chapter may already be taking shape beneath the surface. And what stands out to me most is that this new chapter doesn't seem to begin with urgency. It begins with awareness, with growth, with a deeper understanding of yourself, an understanding of what truly matters. And an understanding that sometimes a door left slightly open doesn't mean you need to walk back through it. Sometimes it simply means the story still has something left to say. And perhaps that's exactly where things begin to get even more interesting. Because once those first layers of emotion begin to settle, what remains is usually not the story of someone else. It's the story of ourselves. And I see that very clearly as the Ten of Swords card appears. What stands out to me about this card isn't a single painful moment. It's accumulation. It feels like someone who tried to hold on for far too long, tried to understand, tried to be compassionate, tried to give one more chance, and then another, until eventually the heart began to grow tired. Many people believe the deepest pain comes when someone leaves, But sometimes the most painful part is the time before they leave. The days spent wondering what is happening. The feeling that something has changed, even though you can't quite put it into words. The conversations that no longer carry the honesty they once did. And that's where the Seven of Swords card enters this story. I don't experience this card as blame. I experience it as distance. A distance created by things left unsaid, feelings held back, thoughts kept hidden. Questions that never received a clear answer. Sometimes people don't hurt each other through words. Sometimes they hurt each other through silence. By leaving the other person to piece everything together alone, to guess, to interpret, to explain, and in the end, still not know whether they truly understood any of it. I think many Leos have walked through a season like that, not because you're weak, but because when you genuinely care about something, you naturally want to believe in the best of it, even when part of your intuition has already begun to sense that something isn't quite right. Then time keeps moving, and the Hermit card appears. This energy reminds me of very early mornings, when the world still feels quiet, when the sound of a fan in the room somehow seems louder than usual, when you're holding a cup of coffee or staring out a window without thinking about anything specific. Just being there, existing alongside your own thoughts. There are seasons when healing doesn't come from advice. It doesn't come from meeting someone new, and it doesn't come from forcing yourself to forget. It comes from sitting with yourself long enough. Long enough for emotions that once felt chaotic to begin finding their own place. Long enough to realize that your worth was never determined by whether someone chose to stay or leave. Long enough to understand that some questions don't need immediate answers, and that some answers only arrive once the heart has become a little more peaceful. I believe this may be one of the greatest gifts that season left behind for many Leos. Not pain, but understanding. Growth. A deeper connection with yourself. And that brings us to the Hanged Man card. There are periods in life when everything seems suspended, not moving forward, not moving backward, simply hanging somewhere in between. Those periods can feel incredibly uncomfortable because we always want to know what's coming next. We want conclusions. We want answers. We want to know whether we should hold on or let go. But when you look back, those seasons that felt like delays often become the very places where the most important changes happened. Not externally, internally. Because while everything appeared to pause, something inside of you was shifting. You began seeing yourself through a different lens. You began realizing that you were stronger than you once believed. You began understanding what you truly need, what you're no longer willing to accept, what you deserve. And what stands out most to me is this: I don't feel the energy of someone who is stuck. I feel the energy of someone slowly stepping out of an older version of themselves. A version that carried too much responsibility for other people's emotions. A version that tried to save things that could never be saved alone. A version that forgot their own heart needed care too. Because sometimes the thing that changes our lives isn't who walks in. It's the moment we begin seeing our own value more clearly than ever before. And from that quiet space, it feels as though another memory is beginning to rise to the surface, not in a loud way, not like an emotional wave suddenly pulling you back into the past. It feels more like you're driving down a familiar road. A song comes on unexpectedly. A familiar scent drifts through the air. An ordinary scene catches your attention, and for just a few seconds, your heart pauses. Just a few seconds. But long enough for an entire chapter of your life to come alive again in your mind. That's the feeling I get as the Four of Wands card appears. And interestingly, I don't see a relationship here. I see a period of time, a chapter of your life, a place where you once felt safe, where you felt seen, where you felt like you could finally set your heart down without always being on guard. That could have been a person, a home, a connection, or simply a version of yourself that trusted a little more than you do now. What makes these memories meaningful isn't that they were perfect, it's that they were real. And the things that are real tend to leave traces behind for a very long time. Even after everything changes. Even after people change. There are afternoons when you think you've traveled so far from that story. Then out of nowhere, you realize your heart still remembers exactly how it felt. Not because you want to go back, but because part of you still honors what once existed. Then the Eight of Cups card comes through. And this feels like a very mature energy. Because sometimes walking away isn't about falling out of love. It's not about resentment. It's not about deciding that everything suddenly meant nothing. Sometimes it's simply because staying no longer allows either person to grow. I think many Leos understand that. There are decisions you make with tired eyes, with hundreds of questions running through your mind, with a heart that still feels heavy. Yet somewhere deep inside, you know you need to keep moving forward. Not because you want to, because you need to. And that's the kind of choice only someone who has truly cared can understand. It's easy to leave behind something that never mattered. It's much harder to walk away from something that once held a piece of your heart. Maybe that's why the Eight of Cups card doesn't feel bitter here. It feels accepting. Slowly accepting. Painful but calm, sad but not hopeless. Like someone gently closing a door behind them and continuing down the road, even though there are still things left unsaid. What catches my attention most, though, is the Queen of Wands card. Because in the middle of all these emotions, this card feels like a reminder of who you really are. Many people look at Leo and think about confidence, strength, presence, the ability to light up a room. But very few people realize that behind all of that is an incredibly sincere heart. You don't open up easily. But when you do, you often give far more than people realize. There are moments when you pretend you're fine. Pretend it didn't affect you. Pretend you've already moved on. But deep down, you're still someone who values genuine connections. And that's why emotional imprints tend to stay with you longer. Not because you're fragile, but because you live from the heart more than most people understand. Then the Six of Cups card appears. And suddenly the entire story slows down, like opening an old photo album, not to relive the past, but to look at it through the eyes of who you are today. What's interesting is that memories don't always come back to hurt us. Sometimes they come back to show us just how much we've changed. You look at an old conversation, an old photograph, an older version of yourself, and realize you're no longer that person. It's still the same heart. But it understands more now. It's calmer now, wiser now, and I think that's why these memories are surfacing. Not to pull you backward, but to help you recognize how far you've actually come. Even so, there's something very interesting about the energy of the Six of Cups card. Because beneath all this growth, there's still a feeling that hasn't completely disappeared. It's not exactly expectation. It's not exactly regret. It's simply the feeling that this story still holds a special place in your heart. And when a memory continues to hold that kind of space, the deeper questions often begin to emerge. Not questions about someone else. Questions about yourself. What do I truly want? What still fits the person I've become? And what am I only carrying because I've carried it for so long? That's where the Six of Swords card comes through. I've always felt that this card carries the image of someone leaving the shore of a familiar river. Behind them is everything they already know. Ahead of them is something they can't fully say yet. There is no triumphant music playing, no dramatic breakthrough, just movement, slow movement, quiet movement, but real movement. I think many Leos may be moving through a season like that. You're no longer standing where you once stood, but you haven't fully arrived where you're trying to go either. It's like crossing a bridge, a little each day, a little with every thought, a little with every moment you choose to forgive yourself. And what's interesting is that most of this journey seems to be happening inside of you rather than around you. Other people may look at your life and assume everything is normal. You still go to work. You still smile. You still show up the way you always have, but only you know how much is being rearranged within your heart. There are mornings when you wake up feeling completely fine. Then by afternoon, a feeling appears that you can't quite explain. Not exactly sadness, not exactly longing, just a small empty space that comes and goes. And it's that space that leads us to the Nine of Swords card. I don't see despair here. I see overthinking, overanalyzing, conversations happening inside your head that nobody else knows about. Imagined scenarios. Responses rewritten over and over in your mind, things you've never spoken out loud. Yet you've said them to yourself hundreds of times. Sometimes we think we're searching for answers, but what we're really searching for is a sense of safety, wanting to know we made the right choice, wanting to know we didn't miss something important, wanting to know we won't have to relive the same pain again. That's a very human feeling, a very real feeling, and a very understandable one. Because when a heart has been hurt before, it usually learns how to be more careful. But that's also when the Knight of Swords card appears, and this energy feels completely different, faster, stronger. Like a part of you wants an answer right now, wants a decision, wants to end this in-between space, wants to know whether to keep moving forward or stop, whether to open the heart or close it, whether to hold on or let go. I think many Leos are feeling two opposing energies at the same time. One part wants to rush ahead, another part wants to slow down and make sure nothing important is being overlooked. And that's where the Queen of Swords card appears. This is such a beautiful energy, because it doesn't come from coldness. It comes from clarity. There is a huge difference between building walls and creating boundaries. Walls are built from fear. Boundaries are built from understanding. And I feel that many Leos are learning that lesson now. You no longer want to shut your heart completely, But you also no longer want to hand over the key simply because someone knocks on the door. The questions you're asking have changed. Will this person truly be there when I need them? Does this connection bring peace or does it bring uncertainty? Am I giving up too much of myself just to hold on to something? That's not suspicion, that's growth. Then the Two of Wands card appears once again in this story. But this time it carries a different feeling. It's no longer a crossroads between the past and the present. It's a crossroads between two versions of yourself. One version willing to open the heart no matter the risk, and another version that has learned to honor its own worth. What stands out to me is that these two versions don't seem to be fighting each other. They seem to be searching for common ground. Neither one is completely right. Neither one is completely wrong. Because the heart still wants connection, while wisdom wants to protect what took so much effort to build. And right there, where those two parts finally meet, it feels as though an important truth is slowly beginning to reveal itself. Not the truth about someone else. The truth about what is still alive inside your heart. Because there are stories that seem like they ended a long time ago. The conversations stopped. The daily moments disappeared. The obvious reasons to think about each other faded away. And yet somehow, they remain. Like an old song sitting quietly in a playlist you rarely open, until one day it starts playing by accident. And you realize you still remember every note. That's the feeling I get from the Six of Cups card. This isn't the energy of attachment. And it isn't the energy of trying to hold on to the past. It feels more like a beautiful memory tucked away in a very deep drawer. You don't see it every day, but you know it's still there. Some people pass through our lives and leave a larger imprint than they ever realize. Not because of what they said, but because of how they made us feel. The feeling of being understood. The feeling of being accompanied through life. The feeling of sharing a piece of your world with someone. And sometimes what the heart remembers isn't the person, it's the feeling. I think that's something many Leos are beginning to understand. Because when enough time passes, we start learning the difference between a person and a memory, between a relationship and what that relationship once represented. Even so, there's something particularly meaningful about the Six of Cups card here. Because it isn't only speaking about the past, it's speaking about what still influences the present. There are decisions you're making today that were shaped by experiences you've already lived through. Standards you've created for yourself because of what you've learned. Boundaries that were born from old wounds. And even some of your deepest hopes may have roots in moments that were once beautiful. That's why memories aren't always something we need to forget. Sometimes they're what help us understand ourselves more clearly. Then the Queen of Cups card appears. And to me, this has always been one of the most beautiful emotional energies in tarot. Not loud, not dramatic, not trying to prove anything, just sincerity, compassion, a deep connection to the inner world. What stands out here is that many Leos seem to be becoming gentler with themselves, no longer blaming themselves for everything that happened, no longer trying to force themselves to move on as quickly as possible, no longer treating emotions as something that must be conquered. Instead, you're beginning to let yourself feel things exactly as they are. If you miss something, you miss it. If you're sad, you're sad. If part of your heart still carries love for a certain memory, that doesn't make you weak. If anything, it suggests the opposite. It shows a level of maturity that allows you to acknowledge what you've lived through without denying it. But then, at the very same time, the Two of Swords card appears, and suddenly the atmosphere shifts. Because there seems to be a question still sitting there. A question that hasn't been fully answered. Not the kind of question that logic can solve, the kind that appears in unexpected moments. While you're walking, while you're working, while you're sitting alone with your thoughts. What really happened? Was there something that was never said? Did I truly understand the whole story? Or is there still a perspective I haven't seen yet? I don't experience this as confusion. I experience it as being caught between two spaces, like a door that was never fully closed, not wide open, but not completely locked either. And that's where the Page of Swords card comes through. This energy feels curious, observant, eager to understand the truth, not to argue, not to control, just because part of you still wants to know, to understand, to see this story from a fuller perspective. What's interesting is that this curiosity no longer feels the way it once did. It's not coming from fear of loss. It's not coming from the need to hold on. It's coming from growth, from a desire to understand yourself more deeply through everything you've experienced. Because sometimes the reason a story stays with us for so long isn't because it never ended. It's because it still has something to teach us. And it feels as though the deeper you move into these emotional layers, the more clearly you begin to see what you've truly been searching for all along. Not beautiful words. Not promises that make the heart race for a moment. Not visions painted entirely by emotion. What you're looking for now is consistency, action. The sense of security that comes when what someone says and what someone does are no longer two different things. And I think that's exactly why the Hierophant card appears here. Because something significant is changing in the way you view relationships. There may have been a time when you believed strong feelings could carry two people through anything. That if the connection was deep enough, every distance could be bridged. That if you tried hard enough and waited long enough, every problem could eventually be solved. But life has its own way of teaching more mature lessons. It shows us that feelings matter. They matter deeply. But feelings alone are not everything. Commitment is what keeps a relationship standing when emotions rise and fall. Maturity is what helps two people move through their differences. Presence is what makes someone feel loved. And I think many Leos are beginning to see things through that lens now. You're no longer drawn to appearances the way you once were. You're no longer easily convinced, simply because someone says exactly what you want to hear. Not because you've become cynical, but because you've come to understand your value more clearly. That's when the Emperor card appears. I've always felt that this card carries the energy of someone who has learned how to stand firmly on their own feet. Not the kind of strength that needs to prove itself to the world. A quieter kind of strength. The kind that enters a room without needing attention, without needing to explain itself, without needing validation. Because it already knows who it is, it knows what it deserves, and it knows what no longer belongs in its life. That's a very different kind of power than the one you may have known before. A power that doesn't come from self-protection, but from self-respect. And I feel many Leos moving closer to that version of themselves. Which may be why certain things that once affected you so deeply don't have the same hold anymore. Not because your heart has closed, because your standards have changed. And that becomes especially clear through the Four of Cups card. There comes a point in life when all we want is to be chosen, but later, something shifts. What matters then is whether that choice truly aligns with who we are. That's why sometimes an opportunity appears and you don't see it through the same eyes. A conversation happens and it doesn't create the same reaction. A door opens and you don't rush through it. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started listening to yourself more carefully. You begin asking different questions. Is this actually good for me? Am I drawn to what's happening now, or am I drawn to a memory? Is this what my heart truly needs, or simply what my heart once knew? Those are deeply mature questions. And I think they arise because you've lived through enough experiences to understand that not every opportunity needs to be taken. Not every open door needs to be walked through. Then the Three of Pentacles card appears. And the message here feels surprisingly simple. You no longer want to be the only one trying. You no longer want to carry an entire relationship by yourself. You no longer want to be the one constantly understanding, constantly compromising, constantly waiting, constantly fixing everything. Because you've learned that healthy connections require two people, cooperation, presence, effort, not perfection, but sincerity. Not one person pulling while the other stands still, but two people choosing to move toward each other. And that seems to be what your heart is searching for now more than ever. Then, in the middle of all these practical realizations, the Star card appears, quietly, gently, almost without making a sound. And that's one of the reasons I love this card so much. Because it doesn't speak about blind optimism. It speaks about hope after growth, hope after self-discovery, hope after experiences that have changed you. This isn't the belief that everything will unfold exactly the way you want it to. It's something deeper than that. It's the belief that no matter what happens, you'll be okay, that you'll continue growing, continue loving, continue being true to yourself. And when someone begins to carry that kind of hope, they rarely see life through the same eyes again. Because somewhere deep within their heart, an important truth is slowly finding acceptance. That maturity isn't about feeling less, and it isn't about hoping less. True maturity begins when you find yourself needing clarity more than assumptions. And that's exactly where the Ace of Swords card appears. I've always felt that this card carries the energy of a sky suddenly clearing after days of heavy clouds. Not because every problem disappears, but because at last you can see things for what they truly are. Some stories don't exhaust us because they're unbearably painful. They exhaust us because they're unclear. Not knowing what the other person was thinking. Not knowing what really happened. Not knowing which feelings were real and which ones were simply our own interpretations. Ambiguity drains far more energy than most people realize. It keeps the mind turning in circles, searching for missing pieces, trying to complete a picture that was never fully there to begin with. But eventually, there comes a point when imagination is no longer what we need most. What we need is truth. Whether that truth is simple or complicated, whether it's easy to hear or difficult to accept. At least it gives the heart something solid to stand on. And I think many Leos are moving closer to that place. No longer wanting to live inside assumptions. No longer wanting to write the rest of someone else's story on their behalf. Simply wanting to see things as they are. What's interesting is that when we're finally ready for the truth, life often begins shifting in unexpected ways. That's when the Page of Cups card appears. A softer energy slipping gently between all this wisdom and logic, like a small door quietly opening, a feeling being placed on the table, something that was never spoken, an apology someone never found the courage to give, or perhaps a heartfelt conversation that never had the chance to happen before. What stands out to me is how human this energy feels. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive like a movie scene filled with grand declarations. It arrives in ordinary moments. The kind of moments that feel real. Like someone finally saying what they've carried inside for far too long. And sometimes a single honest sentence can change the way we view an entire chapter of our lives. Not because it fixes everything, but because it creates clarity. It begins filling in the empty spaces. Then the Tower card appears. And interestingly, I don't experience this card as destruction. I experience it as awakening, because the things that surprise us most are not always the biggest things. Sometimes they're the things that arrive when we least expect them. A truth. A new perspective, something revealed, a conversation that changes the way we understand what happened. I think many people fear change. But sometimes what we really fear is having to look at a familiar story through completely different eyes. Because when the perspective changes, the emotions change too. Old conclusions begin to shift. Even the image we've carried of someone can begin to look different. And while that can feel unsettling for a moment, it can also open the door to a deeper kind of healing. After all, how can we fully heal if part of the truth is still missing? That's why the Tower card doesn't feel destructive to me here. It feels illuminating. Like something hidden finally has a chance to step into the light. And after all of that, the Ace of Pentacles card appears, and suddenly the energy feels different. Grounded, practical, steady. I love that. Because after all the emotions, the memories, the questions, and the inner shifts, what remains isn't a fantasy. It's an opportunity. A foundation, a chance to see everything through new eyes, not to repeat the past, not to return to an older version of yourself, but to step into a new chapter with greater understanding, greater clarity, and greater self-respect. What stands out most is how unhurried this energy feels. It's calm, almost like placing the first brick on solid ground and knowing that whatever gets built from here deserves to be built well. Because after everything you've been through, your heart doesn't seem to be searching for what excites it the most anymore. It's searching for what allows it to feel safe. And that difference alone may be changing the entire way you see this story. Because after all the thinking, all the emotions, and all the lessons you've carried through, it feels as though you're standing in a completely different place from where you first began. Not because life suddenly became perfect. Not because every question found an answer. But because you've changed. And when we change, the way we see the world changes too. That's the feeling that comes through so strongly with the Sun card. There are seasons in life when we live beneath the shadow of doubt, doubting other people, doubting our choices, sometimes even doubting our own worth. But eventually the light begins to return, not from somewhere outside of you, from within. The moment you remember who you are. The moment you realize that what happened to you is not the same thing as who you are. The moment you stop viewing yourself through the lens of old wounds. I think many Leos are moving closer to that light now. A light that doesn't come from being validated by someone else, but from recognizing yourself. And that's a very different kind of confidence. Quieter, steadier, more lasting. Then the Wheel of Fortune card appears. And one of the most interesting things about life is that we often don't realize we've entered a new chapter until we look back. Real change rarely happens overnight. It happens little by little. A new thought, a new perspective, a new habit, a new choice. And then one day you notice something. You don't react the way you used to. You don't hurt the way you used to. You don't chase old answers with the same urgency anymore. That's how cycles end. Quietly, naturally, without needing a dramatic moment. And when one cycle comes to a close, another begins to unfold. That leads us to the Justice card. And I love seeing this card at the end of a journey like this. Because it isn't concerned with who was right or who was wrong, who won or who lost. It's about balance, truth, and responsibility. At some point, we stop needing life to explain everything to us. We stop needing to know exactly why things happened the way they did. We stop needing every detail to make perfect sense, because the experience itself becomes the answer. You learned what you needed to learn. You grew in the ways you needed to grow. And that becomes enough to carry you forward, without bitterness, without resentment, only with understanding. Then the Fool card appears. And this is such a beautiful energy, because it isn't innocence, it's courage. The courage to keep believing in life after disappointment. The courage to open your heart after heartbreak. The courage to keep moving forward without needing to see the entire road ahead. I think a lot of people misunderstand strength. They believe strength means never getting hurt. But sometimes real strength is keeping your heart soft after everything you've been through. That's the difficult part, and perhaps the most beautiful part too. Then the King of Pentacles card appears, and immediately I think about stability. Not the kind built on words, the kind built through actions repeated over time. Consistency, responsibility, showing up when it matters, keeping promises once they're made. It feels as though your heart is no longer searching for the most intense emotions. Instead, it's beginning to move towards something steadier, something that brings peace instead of anxiety, security instead of constant guessing, trust instead of endless uncertainty. And then, for the final time, the Hierophant card appears, almost like a perfect closing note to this journey. Because in the end, this is no longer a story about who left, who did what, who was right, or who was wrong. It becomes a story about values, standards, and understanding what you truly deserve. Some people enter our lives to teach us lessons. Others walk beside us for part of the journey. But the most important thing has always been how we choose to treat ourselves after everything we've experienced. And the strongest feeling I get at the end of this reading is this: you're no longer standing in the energy of someone waiting. You're no longer standing in the energy of someone trying to hold on. You're standing in the energy of someone who knows their own worth. And from that place, the choices you make begin to reflect the growth you've worked so hard to build throughout this entire journey.